Mhm. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our Tuesday Talent Series today on February 27th, 2024. We're so excited today to have Daisy Montgomery from Autistics Anonymous. She's going to present how autism inclusive policies can positively impact your bottom line. We'd first like to recognize our sponsor for the Tuesday Talent Series, Plant Moran. Plant Moran is among the nation's largest accounting, tax, consulting, and wealth management firms and provides a full line of services to organizations in the following industries: manufacturing and distribution, financial services, service, healthcare, private equity, public sector, real estate, construction, and energy. This year, 2024, they are proudly celebrating 100 years. Plant Moran has a staff of more than 3,300 professionals throughout the United States, with international offices in Shanghai, China, Mumbai, India, Tokyo, Japan, and Monterrey, Mexico. In Colorado, Plant Moran has served its Colorado clients for more than 40 years, with offices in Broomfield, Denver, and Fort Collins. Plant Moran has been recognized by a number of organizations, including Fortune magazine, as one of the country's best places to work. For more information, visit plantmoran.com. And we're super excited to have Daisy Montgomery here today. Daisy is an autistic businesswoman and owner of Autistics Anonymous, a company dedicated to educating companies, organizations, and individuals about the humanity behind autism. Daisy has written the book Autistic Everyday, has spoken at more than a dozen events about autism, and has worked with companies large and small to leverage neuro-inclusive policies to improve their culture and their bottom line. And Daisy was sharing with us how busy she has been with school districts and community colleges and others who are reaching out ever since her book came out. So Daisy, I'm super excited to have you here today, and I'll stop sharing my slides so you can come on along and start your presentation.
Excellent, thank you. There we go. All right, can everyone see the screen? Let me get into slideshow mode here. So thank you so much, Yvonne, for inviting me to be on the Tuesday Talent Series. I am so excited to be here. I love educating about autism, and I'm excited to share some knowledge here today. So for our agenda, what we're going to go through first is, a little introduction, a little bit about me. What is autism? There's been so many conversations about autism, but we don't really talk about what it is to be autistic. So we're going to dive into that, as well as some misconceptions and language to use whenever you are working with the autistic community. We're also going to talk about how autism can show up in the workplace, the benefits to creating autism inclusive policies, and then we're going to bring it all together and how to best support your autistic employees. This up here. All right. So a little bit about me. I am autistic and ADHD. And so it's called ADHD for short. I am an award-winning speaker. I'm the author of the book Autistic Everyday, which you can find on Amazon, at Old Firehouse Books in Old Town, as well as at Barnes & Noble, which I'm very proud of. I am the parent of
Daisy, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but people are saying that they can't see your slides.
My goodness.
I think it's because the PowerPoint's on the home screen. It's not on the slideshow.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Is that better? Okay. I apologize for that. All right. I have a background in program management and creation, as well as learning and development. So I have helped many companies build neurodiversity programs from the ground up. And I've either helped manage them before I hand them off, or I've given them frameworks on how to create neurodiversity programs in their businesses and organizations. I'm also the parent of an ADHD child, and I am married to an ADHD Army combat veteran. So you could say I know a lot about different angles of what it is to be autistic and the relationships that come with that. So, what is autism anyway? Does anyone have any ideas of what autism is? I'd love to hear it. No? Okay. I don't blame you. Autism is really fraught with misconceptions, misinformation, and it's just very confusing. We're talking about autism all the time, but what is it really? First, we'll go into what autism is not. Autism is not a mental illness like depression. Autism is not a fad. I hear a lot, well, so many people are being diagnosed autistic now. I think it's just a fad. It is not a fad, and it is actually very difficult to receive your autism diagnosis. It takes, on average, a week to 2 weeks to actually get your diagnosis. So, although it seems like in social media everybody is receiving their diagnosis, those people went through a lot of trouble to receive it because it is so misunderstood, and it takes a lot of time to really delve past or get into the layers of what it means to be autistic. Autism is not caused by vaccines. There is a lot of misinformation about vaccines and autism. There was a British doctor in the early thousands, I believe his name was Andrew Wakefield, and he published a study about vaccines, particularly the MMR vaccine causing autism. And it was very quickly debunked as he made up a lot of fake studies within his papers. But even though he was debunked and discredited, the idea that autism is caused by vaccines still is perpetuated today. Vaccines do not cause autism, but we will get into what actually does cause autism here in a second, or where it comes from. Autism is not contagious. I've had some instances where people would like me to come talk to parents in particular about how if your child, your neurotypical child, is around an autistic child, they're afraid that they will catch autism or that they will mimic behaviors from autistic children. Autism is not contagious. So you don't have to worry about your neurotypical children catching it. It's not a disease. In the past, whenever the diagnostic criteria for autism was created, it was very much based on white male patients, specifically children. And in the 1960s, that is when these criteria were really considered part of the medical community. Dr. Leo Kanner in the 1950s here in America, he started to come up with what we now consider autism, and it was called Kanner syndrome. And at the time, and moving into the 1960s, he only focused on young white males. And as a result of that, even perpetuated through to today, there is a tendency to overlook autism in girls and women, as well as in people of color. So, compared to white males, women and people of color are severely underdiagnosed and are not getting the supports that they need because of those old stereotypes of what autism looks like. Autism is also not a disorder that you can grow out of. We hear a lot about, you know, whenever my child, autistic child, was young, they really struggled, and now they're not really struggling anymore with certain aspects of their autism and things like that. You do not outgrow autism. However, it is not uncommon for a lot of autistic people to gain coping skills as we get older that children just don't have yet. So it can seem like an autistic adult may not be as autistic as a child. And this is simply because we've had a lot more time to develop coping skills. We've been able to go to therapy and things like that. So now that we've gone over what autism is not, let's get into what autism is. Autism, again, is not a mental illness. It's not a disease. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning that you are born with it. It is not acquired. You cannot get it from a TBI or from vaccines or from any other place. You typically inherit it from your parents or someone within your family lineage. Neurodevelopmental disorder means that it is the structure of our brain. A lot of times people get confused over, well, what does the structure of your brain mean in terms of developmental disorders? And what we're talking about is not necessarily the shape of the brain. I did have a woman ask me one time, like, hey, my niece is autistic. And when she was younger, she had brain surgery and they didn't see autism in her brain. Well, it's not it's not a matter of opening the skull and you see autism as a physical being. Um, what it is, though, however, is the neural pathways and how autistics process information compared to a neurotypical or non-autistic brain. And in a few slides, I'll show you the difference through a CT scan and how an autistic brain processes information versus the neurotypical brain. Again, autism has a high chance of heritability. So if your child is autistic, there is a very good chance that either you, your partner, or your parents were or are autistic. Autism is lifelong and it is a neurodifference and a disability. There's been some conversations going on lately about how autism is just a neurodifference that should be celebrated and that it's not a disability. However, I completely disagree with that take. I believe that based on science, autism is a neurodifference, but it is also a disability. And when people say, well, it's not a disability, it's just a difference, they're really minimizing the struggles of what it's like to be autistic. And that ends up being a barrier to autistic people getting support. And so it is a difference, but it's also a disability. Autism is also a disorder that appears across cultures, races, and ethnicities. We are finding through newer research that one's culture actually impacts how a person's autism presents, which I think is incredibly interesting, but it makes sense, right? Our ideas of autism and how it presents in America are different from India or China or in Europe. And I think that is very cool. Autism is not a death sentence. I've worked with a lot of parents, and there is this common fear once their child gets a diagnosis that their child won't be able to have a career, that they won't be able to have meaningful relationships or live independently, and things of that nature. And it's understandable, right? As parents, we want our children to succeed and fit in and be able to achieve what they want to in life. However, sometimes, or a lot of times, doctors who give the diagnosis, they're not autistic themselves, and they end up scaring a lot of parents over what autism is going to look like in their child's life. I was on the receiving end of that myself whenever my child was diagnosed. They told me flat out that my son would never speak, use the bathroom, be able to climb stairs. I mean, just a lot of things they were telling me he'll never be able to do. And they also correlated, oh, autism equals a intellectual disability, which is actually often not the case with autism. Um, and I didn't buy into it. I felt like, how can you make a sweeping generalization about a child's entire life whenever they're 2 or 3 years old? And I'm happy to say that Ashton, my son, he uses the bathroom on his own. He climbs the apple tree in our backyard. He talks. He's just like any other kid. He's just autistic. So very often when we think about autism, we think about the spectrum as being this straight line. You're either very autistic on one end or you're just a little autistic on the other end. However, this is not an accurate representation of autism. This color wheel is actually from my book, and it goes through the different aspects of what it's like to be autistic. So, executive functioning, perception, motor skills, sensory, processing. And each autistic individual, their color wheel is going to look different. This is an example of my strengths and weaknesses when it comes to my autism. I am very good at communicating and speaking. However, my perception, my awareness of danger around me or of social cues is something that I struggle with immensely. And I do want to say, if you've met one autistic person, then you've met one autistic person. No two autistic people are exactly alike, and they have their own strengths, weaknesses, struggles, and other aspects of their autism that they may struggle with or excel at that another autistic person may not. So we're going to get a little into misconceptions about autism and looking past the stereotypes. The most common misconceptions that I come across in doing this work is autism equals an intellectual disability. In the 1980s, it was estimated or believed that about 75% of autistic people were intellectually disabled. However, as early as 2014, studies from the University of Cambridge and other prominent universities have said this number is a lot smaller than we initially thought. So now recent studies are showing that 75% of autistics are not intellectually disabled. It's more like 15 to 25% of autistics are intellectually disabled. There's this idea that autistics are too childlike to have relationships, that autistics don't have empathy. I hear this one a lot. And although there are some autistics that do struggle with emotional empathy, we have a surplus of cognitive empathy. So we can understand exactly why a person may be feeling the way they do. We may just not always feel it ourselves. However, the majority of autistics actually suffer from what is called hyperempathy, to the point where we may confuse our feelings with someone else's. So if someone is extremely distraught about something, we feel it so empathetically that we feel like we're the ones who are distraught as well. There is the idea that non-speaking autistics don't know what is being said to them, or they are unaware of their surroundings. I think it's very interesting that we do this with non-speaking autistics, but we don't do this with deaf people. We assume that deaf people understand what is being communicated to them, even if they're not speaking. And we say non-speaking instead of nonverbal because nonverbal implies that there is no understanding of verbal communication. However, non-speaking just denotes that they're not speaking to get their information across. And of course, the idea that autistics cannot live independently or have careers. As we get a little into the work environment and how autism can show up in the workplace, we will see statistics that say 75 to 85% of autistics are unemployed. This is not because we're not able to have careers, but often there are barriers in the workplace that make it very difficult for us to sustain employment. And although, of course, there are autistics who will never be able to live independently, a good majority of us are able to live independently, have relationships, and have a fulfilling life on our own terms. One other misconception I will get into briefly is the idea that we're all a little autistic. This is not true. It's not based in science. I think that sometimes people will see or hear an autistic person talk about anxiety or social struggles and things like that, and a holistic or neurotypical person will say, well, I have struggles with socialization, so I must be a little autistic as well. There is no a little autistic or a lot autistic. You either are autistic or you're not. And again, I think it's interesting that we do this with autism, but we don't do this with other conditions. We don't say, oh, we're all a little Down syndrome. Oh, we're all a little deaf. We're all a little, affected by rheumatoid arthritis. So if someone says we're all a little autistic, I don't tend to take it personally, but it's not scientifically correct. As we were talking about brain structure and neural pathways and how autistic brains process information versus a neurotypical brain, this is what I am talking about. So the autistic brain is actually Temple Grandin's brain. And if you're not familiar with Temple Grandin, she is an autistic advocate. She teaches animal husbandry at Colorado State University here in town. And whenever she was introduced to stimuli, her brain lit up in almost all areas of the brain. This is because autistics on average take in 42% more information at any given time compared to neurotypical people. And this can be sensory, it can be we are doing future prediction through pattern recognition. We're just taking in so much information all of the time that, and this is reflected in this brain. And this also reflects the visual component of learning that a lot of autistic people have compared to auditory processing. So when we look at the non-autistic brain, it's a pretty clear path. They get the information and it goes directly to the center of the brain where they need to get that information. However, with autism, as I was telling Yvonne, we have a billion tabs open in our brain all the time, and we're constantly processing through all of that information. So even though you cannot necessarily see autism, autism is impacting us every single day as an autistic person, and it's really an internal condition where we're trying to process so much all the time that it comes outward as behaviors, meltdowns, and things like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about person first versus identity first language. In the past, it was considered the gold standard to say person with autism. And this was because there was the idea that we want to separate the person from autism. You know, autism isn't the person. However, because autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder and literally part of our brain, you cannot separate the person from the autism. It's part of our identity. So a lot of autistics prefer identity first language. I'm an autistic person, not a person with autism. Of course, there are we're not a monolith like other marginalized communities. We don't always think all the same thing, neither does any other marginalized community. So there are some people that use them interchangeably. I'm a person with autism and I'm an autistic person. The best rule of thumb for that is to just ask the autistic person, hey, what kind of language do you prefer when I'm referring to autism and you? So now that we've done a quick primer of what autism is, let's dive into how autism can show up in the workplace and the challenges and the triumphs of maintaining employment as an autistic person. This is an overview, so it's not going to go over every single challenge that autistic people face in the workplace, but especially in office settings, excuse me, it is very easy for autistic people to get overwhelmed. One, because of all of that extra information that we're taking in all of the time, but also when there is no structure to our day, it can create a lot of anxiety because we don't know what is coming next. And because we tend to excel at pattern recognition, sometimes that anxiety is exacerbated based on things that we have experienced before. There, there may be struggles to understand office politics and thrive in an office environment due to sensory challenges. I have never understood office politics. I understand it in a logical way, but the utility of it is lost to me. Why are we playing office politics when we could just say what we mean and mean what we say? And when it comes to those kind of social environments in the workplace, autistics often feel caught in the middle of it because we either don't realize that people are trying to pull us into those kind of situations, or we're like, what is the big deal? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense to go through these rituals of office politics when we could just be honest about what we want and need. Office environments tend to have a lot of fluorescent lighting. And even if you are working in a grocery store, for example, or another retail store, fluorescent lighting can be extremely sensory challenging for autistic people. So whenever we say we have to be in the office, we have to be in these environments that have these sensory challenges, we can cope at first, but after a while, if we don't have accommodations or supports, it can lead to meltdowns or shutdowns. And I just want to differentiate the two real quick. A meltdown is an external expression of overwhelm. It is not a tantrum, like when we think about children having tantrums because they're not getting what they want. A meltdown is an involuntary response by our nervous system because of sensory or information overload. A shutdown is the same thing as a meltdown, except it's internalized. So if a person is going through a shutdown, they may not be crying or stimming, which is self-stimulation. It's a very important tool for autistics to process information for us. A person going through a shutdown may look like they're staring off into space. They may not be able to respond to questions that you have, even if it's something great like, hey, would you like a slice of pizza? We can hear you, but we cannot process the words that you are saying. And until we are out of a meltdown or shutdown, we will not be able to respond to you in the way that we would like. A lot of autistics are visual processors. So whenever we're on a lot of meetings, like whenever I was in corporate, we would have meetings all the time. And I do not process information that way. So I would have to write down almost everything that was being talked about so I could refer to it and process it. When you're in a meeting and you have to take track of making the right eye contact, saying the right things, making sure you have the right tone of voice, and all of those other little things like being aware of your sensory environment. It is very difficult to hear the words, process them, and understand what's being said. And that's why so many autistics prefer written communication, because it gives us time to really think about what we want to say, but also it gives us the opportunity to read the information and process it at our own pace. Again, talking about unexpected phone calls or meetings. I had a boss one time who loved to call me unexpectedly just to brainstorm ideas for a program that we were running. And I reached a point where I was like, Tanya, I know that you value my ideas and you're calling me because you value my opinion, but I cannot brainstorm in a meaningful way with you whenever you call me unprompted. If we can schedule it and you send an agenda, I can think about what ideas I can come up with in that appropriate time. Because whenever you call an autistic unexpectedly, we freeze because we weren't mentally prepared to have that social interaction. Common strengths in the workplace. There is a lot of them. So I mentioned the autistic pattern recognition. We are so great at data analysis because we can see all the data and we can deduce patterns and outcomes based on that data because we are so good at seeing patterns in behavior, numbers, all sorts of things. So take advantage of that, you know. We also give reliable and honest feedback. Some people think that autistics are rude in the way that we communicate, and it's not that we're being rude, we're being forthcoming. So if you come to us and you say, hey, can I have your honest opinion? We will give it to you. It may not necessarily be what you want to hear, but we will always be honest with you about what we're thinking or feeling in terms of whatever question that you're asking us. We're also able to think outside of the box to find solutions and creative ideas. Although we may struggle with on-the-spot brainstorming, if you give an autistic person some time, we are able to really think outside of the box to find creative solutions to what was considered an impossible problem. We also tend to excel at systems creation. Because autistics rely a lot on structure to get us through the day, we are really great at creating systems, whether it's a program, a software solution, engineering. I mean, there's so many possibilities. We're able to transfer how we use our own structure in our lives to creating systems that work in the corporate or small business environment. And we can also be fantastic writers because, as I mentioned, how we prefer written communication, we have honed our skills to writing in a way that is to the point, factual, and we're able to get ideas across a lot faster that way than if we are trying to verbally express them. So what are the benefits of creating autism inclusive policies? These are just a few of the benefits. But the bottom line is that inclusivity benefits everyone. We have seen just from what I've done and neurodiversity programs that I've created, we have seen increased employee retention. I had a client whose turnover rate was 25%, and they could not figure out why. We ran some data analysis, we did some surveys, and we found that a lot of the people who were leaving were actually disabled employees that did not feel supported in the workplace. The reasonable accommodations process was not clear. They felt like their managers used their disabilities against them. One lady said, I'm dyslexic and my manager makes fun of me because I struggle with spelling things correctly. And this was causing a lot of people to quit. And whenever we started implementing very clear processes on how people can get help, we started training managers on disability and how to speak to people with disabilities. The retention or the turnover rate dropped from 25% to 10%, which is a huge, huge improvement, especially for a global company. Work from home policies can benefit other disabilities too. One of the best easy things that employers can do is have a work from home policy or flexible schedule policies. This helps cut out so much of the sensory environment that we have to walk into every day. So when we're not having to battle fluorescent lighting or the office politics or socializing, we're able to do a lot more work in a shorter amount of time, and there's definitely increased productivity. Also, when we start looking at the autistic population and seeing those 75 to 85% unemployment rates, there's a huge opportunity here because we are a knowledge-rich talent pool. Every autistic is an expert at something. And I say that because we take our special interests extremely seriously. And employers can benefit from that knowledge if we give autistics a chance. And I'm not saying that autistics are just a group to be leveraged because we're people. But I think often when people hear autism, they overestimate how disabled we are. So they think that we're too disabled to be a meaningful employee in their organization, and that's just simply not true. Also, people are wanting to purchase and be involved with companies that are reflective of their values. Inclusivity is a huge driver for a lot of consumers, according to the 2021 Consumer Intel report, that they want to work with companies that reflect their values. So if you're an inclusive company, more people are looking to work with you than if you didn't really care about being inclusive at all. And of course, according to the World Economic Forum in 2019, inclusive focused company cultures on average make 28% higher revenue, they double their net income, and 30% higher economic profit margins over a 4-year period. So there are very tangible results that you get from being inclusive for not just autistic people, but disabled people, people of color, the LGBT community, and more. So let's bring it all together. how to best support your autistic employees. We're taking action over awareness. You know, everyone is aware of autism on some level, excuse me, but very few people are actually taking action. And that's where we want to be. We want to be taking action. So here's a few suggestions. Reconsider your interview process. Are you putting so much emphasis on the social niceties of the interview process, or are you focusing more on the knowledge and ability to do the job? Very often, autistics are not great at traditional interviews because we struggle with eye contact. We may not want to shake someone's hand because of a sensory issue. Where can you make adjustments to your interview process so autistics can thrive in that environment? Sending questions ahead of time is a really great way to say to autistic people, I support you. I want to set you up for success. We want to support you in your disability here at our company or organization. Don't say, wow, you don't look autistic. Very often people think that autism is like Down syndrome and that there is a look to it. However, there's not. Anyone can be autistic and look completely normal. Ask what their preferred method of communication is. We've talked about it a lot during this session, written versus verbal communication. Give opportunities to work from home. Please refrain from calling randomly because this can cause autistic people to freeze. And very often it is misinterpreted as we don't have any ideas or we're being rude or a bevy of other things. The most important thing you can do in your organization is create an environment of safety. Very often, autistics don't even self-identify because they are afraid they will not be supported or people will look at them differently. So the best way to do this is encourage people to ask for support. Encourage people to be who they are. Train your managers on what it's like to work with autistic people. This helps create an environment of safety where we feel like we can say, hey, I'm really overwhelmed and I need some supports. And another simple way to support autistics in the workplace is send out an agenda before meetings. This helps with any potential anxiety and gives autistics time to come up with a thoughtful engagement during the meeting. We have come to the end of my presentation. I'll go through a few ways that people can work with me, and then we can answer some questions. So Autistics Anonymous offers one-on-one support for autistic individuals, parents, ADHDers, relatives of autistic people, and we work through how can I best support the autistics in my life. I also do trainings, consulting, and keynote speaking for organizations and offer different things for that. And of course, you can always pick up my book, Autistic Everyday, at the retailers below, or whenever I get some back in stock, you can order from me directly. And here is a couple of pages from my book to give you an idea of what it's like. And I appreciate everyone's time so much. If anyone has any questions, I think we have a couple of minutes for that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see who is talking.
I think Priscilla just gave you some hand clapping, so that was nice.
Oh, thank you, Priscilla. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Natalie.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation, Daisy. I am curious. So I work at a small company and we have one person on staff who's self-identified as autistic, but I'm curious how you address, like, I don't want to single that person out, and I would love to, I kind of have some ideas on one-on-one asking what would be supportive, but would you suggest like asking everyone, hey, does anyone need this kind of support? Or is it better to kind of one-on-one um, single people out? And how do you address that? Like some people might not self-identify. Does that make sense?
In those situations, it's best to go from a group perspective. So whenever you single out an autistic person, that can make, even if it's well-meaning, it can make them withdraw further. However, if you are like, hey, the organization is rolling out some policies on support, here's some resources, and make it more generalized and encourage it, then autistic people are more likely to feel more comfortable in coming forward and saying, I need some support without feeling ashamed or singled out for being autistic. Does that help, Natalie?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. It was really helpful. I just have one in regards to communication. We have one individual with our agency as well that self-identifies, isn't on the spectrum, but has an intellectual developmental disability, and communication can be a struggle. And so just for us as a staff to make sure that we are taking the time and giving him the space to find what he's trying to say and articulate that in a way that we understand. Do you have any suggestions for us? I liked your idea of the agenda before, and we just implemented that literally yesterday. So there's time. Do you recommend like maybe having a conversation before the staff meeting to help him talk through those things? What do you recommend?
How does he communicate currently? Does he use a device?
His communication is fine. I think where he's expressed frustration is it's hard for him to get everything he's saying because he'll tend to go kind of long-winded and tell a story before he gets to the point, and then
Yes.
we'll be ready to move on to the next thing. So really getting it more concise. And I was just trying to find out how can we as his staff, his support him through that, so we're actually allowing him to say what he wants to say and he can be part of the conversation without cutting him off, but also being able to get through our meeting in a timely manner.
Yeah. So one reason why autistics tend to be long-winded is because we have historically been misunderstood. So we feel like if we go through every single detail of what is in our brain, it will remove any potential misunderstanding. So that's one reason why he does that. I would give him specific questions that you want him to answer for the meeting and give him a time limit.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because then it is very clear before the meeting, okay, they want my thoughts on this, and this is the amount of time I have. And that naturally creates the structure to for us to be like, okay, I only have 2 minutes to say what I need to say, and we'll condense it on our own.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did anyone else have any questions before we turn back to Yvonne and close out this session?
I think I do. Hi, I am Jordan. I'm like a local coach. I do similar stuff. So it's very exciting. Thank you so much for this presentation. I do have a question on when employers hear that, my guess is often they will say, that sounds like a lot of time that this person is going to take away from this meeting to work on something. I'm assuming that they're no longer working on what I want them to work on, because I know they're going to be spending a lot of time coming up with their ideas for this question or whatever. Obviously, that's a little like a misstep because a lot of times this wheel spinning takes away from the work itself. I'm wondering how you communicate that with employers or what that looks like.
Well, I would say that what are the costs of not communicating these things beforehand to let them work on it? It is a lot more time to just throw meetings and questions on autistics than it is to give it to them ahead of time. Because whenever it is unexpected, you're immediately triggering anxiety in autistic people because we struggle with rigidity in our thinking, and going from our whatever we're thinking at that given moment to, hey, Daisy, what do you think about this and this and this? And give me your ideas. We will shut down. And then working through a shutdown or meltdown is a lot more time intensive, like hours, than it is to take 5 minutes to come up with an agenda or, hey, I want you to be thinking about this for whatever event. So that's what I would say to that is whenever you introduce the unknown with no warning, you are effectively crippling the autistic working in your environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry about that. I was on mute. So we're super excited. I think, Daisy, your presentation was so amazing. And before I came to the chamber, I worked at Columbine Health Systems, and I worked with 4 or 5 individuals who are autistic people. And we had to learn the hard way. If we'd have had your session, we would have been right on it. It would have just been amazing. So everything that you shared is so right on and so amazing. So thank you for that today. Our session next week on the 5th is navigating the new era of buyer-centric sales, strategies to close more sales. So you never know what our talent series will be about. We hop from one topic to another. And so hopefully that's something that matches for you as well. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Daisy, for presenting not only amazing information, but also sharing who you are, and that it just made it so personable and so real. So thank you so much. I hope all of you have an amazing rest of your day, and we will send you the slide presentation from Daisy and the recording, if not later today, for sure by tomorrow morning. So thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.